Thanks, Sandra. Jan Semenza speaking here. Thanks for joining us today. I worked on climate change for 30 years or so. I worked on heat-related mortality way back in the 90s in Chicago when a big heat wave hit. And I was the lead investigator for CDC at the time. And then most recently, I worked with the Centers for Disease Prevention and Control in Stockholm on climate change and infectious diseases. And I'll touch on some of this work on today. So the next thing I need to do, I need to thank myself for that nice introduction, and
Well done.
I think I'll go right ahead with my first slide. If you could pull up my. So the title of the session today is called Preventing Mosquito-Borne Diseases, Preparing for Responsible Travel in Europe. And the angle that we will take is the climate change angle, because as we all know, climate change impacts mosquito-borne diseases or vector-borne diseases in general, for that matter. And let's see if I don't see, I don't think I don't seem to be able to slide here. There we go.
Okay. Yeah.
So this is what we're up against, right? So, okay, guys, time to choose: heat wave, heavy rains, or West Nile virus. So you choose, right? So this is the theme of the meeting today. How do we cope with these climate change impacts? And obviously, we would like to focus on infectious diseases. We're probably not going to touch on West Nile fever, just because when it comes to West Nile, we are dead-end hosts, so there is no risk for importation of West Nile virus, but obviously tourists are potentially impacted by West Nile. But we will touch on a number of other diseases. So the theme of the conference today is that mosquito-borne diseases are becoming an increasing reality in Europe. And as you all know, we have this epidemic of dengue in Italy as we speak, with more than 200 cases. And that's obviously of a huge concern, not just for Italy, but for Europe in general, France, Spain in particular, just because it looks like we are going from an epidemic situation to an endemic scenario where we will have to deal with this kind of emergencies on a regular basis and deal with these tropical diseases now in this quasi-tropical climate that we have here in the southern part of Europe. So these tropical diseases are coming to Europe in light of climate change. So we need to engage the travel industry, and we need to raise awareness in different sectors and try to come to terms with the fact that things are changing. And the event today will now bring together European stakeholders across the industry, from different institutions, civil society, and academia, to come up with strategies how we can better prepare for this new reality that we are in. And basically the objectives are that first we need to articulate the problem, see what actual threats are when it comes to these mosquito-borne diseases in Europe, and then what kind of steps do we need to take from a cross-sectional perspective, trying to prevent these outbreaks from happening in the first place, and then what can we do when it comes to travel in particular. So obviously vaccination is a big part of that, but you will see it's not the only strategy that we'll be discussing today. There are some other public health interventions that we can envision that need to be combined with vaccination, such as testing, surveillance, and things like that. And so those are the topics that we would like to discuss today. And here's the agenda. It's kind of small print, but we will have a number of interesting presentations from across the field that will highlight these issues from different angles. And I will sequentially introduce the speakers when we go through this list. And the first thing I would like to do is to provide my apologies for the Member of Parliament, European Parliament, who has not been able to join us today. He was very much interested in coming, but he was held up in the last minute and wasn't able to come. So unfortunately, he will not be here. So I will move to the next speaker, which happens to be myself. So the focus again is travel and how that impacts mosquito-borne diseases. And as you all know, we have this particular friend that we call the Asian tiger mosquito. Oh boy, thing is difficult. The Asian tiger mosquito that is responsible for the local transmission of diseases such as dengue, chikungunya, or Zika, which are all tropical diseases that have now emerged in Europe as a potential threat to public health. And if you look at the European map, you can see the expansion of this Asian tiger mosquito from 1995 in the very top left corner in these 5-year intervals, how it spreads throughout the European continent. It was actually introduced initially in Albania in the 70s, then in the 90s in Italy, and has been spreading ever since. And you can see that the current situation is quite intimidating when you see how far that expansion has reached. It has reached far north, much more north than we had anticipated, into areas in Belgium, Holland, and Germany. So that is obviously a concern because, as I mentioned earlier, this particular mosquito is involved in dengue and chikungunya outbreaks. And here on this map, you can see these little dots that represent the number of outbreaks. So we're not looking at cases in this case, but the number of recurrent outbreaks. And you can see that these recurrent outbreaks happen along the Mediterranean coast in Spain, France, in Italy, but also in Croatia, and particularly in urban, semi-urban environments. And we have done some analyses along these lines where we can see that temperature is a very strong determinant of these types of outbreaks. In fact, this urban feature is the fact that Aedes albopictus loves urban environments. It propagates very easily in these type of settings. And so we have, in fact, set up an intervention trial in Barcelona where we eliminated mosquito breeding sites in the drains where these mosquitoes usually propagate. And we have been able to show that with this type of an intervention, we're able to eliminate mosquitoes in the first place. So there are potentially strategies to cope with this type of mosquito. And I will love to present the data once we have this paper in press, because it's an important step towards controlling of these type of mosquitoes. But in the meantime, what can we do when it comes to these type of mosquitoes? One thing we might want to consider is citizen science. It turns out that as part of the ID Alert project, which is a Horizon-funded project, we have set up a system where citizens like yourself can enter the fact that they're bitten by a mosquito, which type of mosquito has been biting you, and basically document the hazard and the nuisance of these type of mosquitoes. And it turns out that here on this European map for Aedes japonicus, which is a vector for West Nile fever, but also for dengue, maybe not as efficient as for dengue, but nevertheless has some competence for dengue as well. And you can see that in Spain, in the northern Spain, there is a blue dot, because that blue dot was in fact the first detection of Aedes japonicum in Spain through citizen science. So we can potentially engage communities to help keep a tab on these type of mosquitoes. And in fact, on the next map that the European Centers for Disease Prevention and Control published, you can see here Spain, now in the northern part of Spain, has now a red area, which indicates that it has been detected in Spain. And so we have this mosquito detection system through citizen science. And you can see the tick here that's quite upset about this, the circumstances, because we have now developed a tick monitoring system as well. So we have used citizen science both for mosquito detection, but also for tick detection. And in this cartoon, the tick is not quite aware that that thing is actually in the pipelines. So if you look at these dengue outbreaks and chikungunya outbreaks over the years, so on the left panel here, you have the dengue outbreaks. On the right one, you have the chikungunya outbreaks. We can see that these outbreaks happen more and more often. And when we plot the climatic suitability here plotted out as the vectorial capacity, which is basically the climatic suitability for transmission for these mosquitoes. You can see that that climatic suitability has increased ever since the mosquito was introduced in Albania in the 70s, and we have seen this dramatic increase ever since. And the same thing is true for chikungunya as well. So there has been a dramatic improvement in the climatic condition for these type of outbreaks. However, the climate is not the only issue that factors into this. It turns out that airplanes, and this is not a real picture, just to make sure that you don't get bored here. Europe is a very busy airspace. It's not as bad as it looks on this slide, thank God. But basically the issue is that if a mosquito bites you in endemic area for dengue or chikungunya, let's say you are on vacation in Thailand or in Brazil, and then it turns out that within a short time period, you fly out of that area and go back home. And within that viremic period, when you have virus in the blood, you come back home and you happen to live in Barcelona, Milan, or Rome, where the mosquito is present. Then the mosquito can pick up that virus and transmit that virus to someone else. And these are autochthonous transmissions. So these are local transmissions where the transmission actually is propagated by local mosquitoes on site. And the bad news is that we have a huge number of air passenger volumes illustrated as these bubbles here on this slide here with a destination to Europe. Do you see that Europe is blacked out because these are just passengers that fly into Europe from all over the world, and this is where they land. You can recognize Paris and Frankfurt and London, but we obviously are concerned in areas where these mosquitoes are present. And so any flights from those areas, from endemic areas into Europe where the mosquitoes present, those are the areas of high risk. And so when you now plot the climatic suitability against the passenger volume illustrated on this slide here, you can see the top line is the climatic suitability against the passenger volumes with that red dotted line. You can see that there is a huge increase in passenger volume over time, and this is what we are up against. So what can we do about that? So we have decided to look at this big data sets that are currently available from IATA, the International Air Transportation Association, and we model that against dengue importation cases. And our findings, this again is this bubble corresponds to the passengers that are flying into different parts of Europe. The yellow areas are the areas at the time where the mosquito was present. And we found that the highest risk for onward transmission, when we link the passenger volume against importation of dengue, happens during August, September, and October, which means that we can set up seasonal surveillance during those 3 summer months to keep tabs on potential importation risk from those endemic areas. And we also know that, for example, at that time, 50% of the air passenger comes into Milan and Rome. And obviously Barcelona also on this slide. Those are the high risk areas where we need to set up surveillance systems during those seasons where we expect the mosquito to appear. Another scenario was a chikungunya outbreak. So I just spoke about dengue, and now this one here is chikungunya, because in 2017, there was a big outbreak in Rome of chikungunya. And in this case, we not only took advantage of air passenger volume, but also of climatic conditions that happened at that time, and local dispersion of individuals. And for this, in this case, we used Twitter feeds. It's now called X, but we used Twitter feeds at the time to track where people move from the epicenter of an epidemic. And in this case, again, the passenger volume coming into Europe. And I don't know if you can see this at the very top, but this is now the climatic suitability for July, August, and September. And when we now combine the climatic suitability with these Twitter feeds, can you see at the very top left corner here? This is where the chikungunya outbreak happened in France first. And with Twitter feeds, we can map people that move from the Var department here in the southern part of France to Rome. So we can now connect these epicenters of the epidemic with these Twitter feeds, which means that we can not only see where people come from international epidemic on the ground by using this type of big data. I call this big data because these are obviously big data sets. And so here's my final slide. So we have seen that Aedes albopictus, the Asian tiger mosquito, has expanded dramatically over the years, and it in fact continues to do so. And that climate plays a bigger role in these type of outbreaks, but obviously it's not the only one. Travel and tourism is an important contributor to the importation risk. And then we believe that using citizen science, as I illustrated earlier, but also using big data for these type of analyses can potentially guide seasonal surveillance that could tailor testing and vaccination in areas at risk to mitigate that potential risk. So this is just an overview of some of the issues that we are up against. And I would now like to introduce Willy Brook to give a talk about which is the